What's up guys, this is Evan. Today we're going to walk through an installation of the brand new VanUp Razor Pack for the 2015 to current Ford Transit high roof. On this particular van, we're going to set it up for a spare tire mount, a toolbox mount, and then some bike rack arms. There's several other different ways you can set it up, but this is what this particular customer wanted. Let's get started. We're going to start on the inside because this van is a passenger van. If you have a cargo van, you can skip this step. But in order to access what we need to at the bottom inside of the door, we're going to have to temporarily remove this inner panel. So it's actually pretty easy. The whole thing is just snapped on. There's no hardware. So you're going to want to pop off this little piece that captures the door lock, and we're going to snap the cable out of this. All pretty simple. And we're going to lift it off over the door lock knob. Kind of hard to see in here, but there's little tabs you have to squeeze on this cable housing to get it to pop out. We'll do the same thing on the other side. A couple quick differences on this driver's side door. You don't have the little lever or anything to mess with. It's just a solid panel. But there are a few screws hidden behind these little dots. A pick works pretty well to pry these out. And it's a tiny little bolt behind there. You'll need a 7mm socket. If your van has this plastic stuck down here, just remove it, just gently peel it back and set it aside. It's really sticky. It'll go back on. Just set it aside, and then when we're done with this project, we'll stick this back on. With the inside disassembled, now we're going to take off these outer plastics. You'll have to have the license plate off, and then this little surround around this door magnet, it needs to come off too, and it just kind of pops in place. Now our first mounting location for the rack is actually going to be where this magnet is. We're going to use one of our supplied bolts to create a stud in the same place. So we're going to go inside the van and take this magnet out. Now we're going to remove this plastic panel, and it's snapped in place, so we just pop it off. You can twist out the license plate lights, just about a quarter turn counterclockwise, and they'll wiggle free. To get this stud out, first we're going to take this nut and magnet assembly off from the outside, and it's reverse threaded. So clockwise to break it loose. Now we can remove the bolt from the inside. It's a T55 Torx bit. And we'll do the same thing over here. I'll pop this off while I'm here. Reverse thread, so clockwise to remove. I'll pop this panel off. Next step is for us to loosely assemble our Razor Pack assemblies. I like to assemble these from the top down, although it doesn't really matter, but typically this top panel is just going to go all the way up. So I'm going to bolt it on, and then this lower panel, in this case, we're using it for a spare tire mount, and I figured out roughly how high I want it, but really all that matters now is we're using these panels to set the width spacing of the rails. If you have to move it up or down after it's on the van, that won't be a problem. So this really just kind of fixes all the parts together as an assembly so we can hang it on the door. So we'll do a bolt, a flat washer, and then we'll use this serrated lock nut on the inside. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on this side. Just get it loosely assembled. Once we make sure everything's square, we'll tighten the bolts down, but first I just want to get all the bolts put in. Next we're going to square this up and tighten it down. So in my opinion, the easiest way to make sure this is square is to push the panel all the way down till it bottoms out on the bolts on both sides. So if all 4 points are pushed against the top of the slot, it's going to inherently just be square. And when you get to the point of hanging this on the door, if it doesn't hang quite right, at that point we can loosen a few of these and let it skew over. But for now, the best bet is to make sure it's square. Since we use the serrated lock nuts on the back, that eliminates the need for a backup wrench. So just grab a 7/32 hex key, and they should tighten down. Okay, we're gonna preliminarily hang this on the door. So the way this mounts is it has the top two mounts are folded over like little hooks, and they're just gonna hang on the top of the door. And then we're gonna come down here and add a couple studs to make it really rigid. So to start with, we'll have to do some fine tuning, but to start, we're gonna come about an inch in from the edge of the door. So that's where we're gonna put the outside of the upper mount. So you'll see what I mean in just a second. So I'm gonna grab the Razor Pack and hang it on the door and see how it hangs at the bottom. Before we do the final install, there's some clear vinyl that we're gonna put on the top of the door to protect it. In the meantime, just make sure you're very careful not to scratch anything. All right, with this hanging here, now we're gonna go ahead and start adding our lower hardware. Okay, first step, we're gonna replace that door magnet that we took out with the supplied bolts. So as far as big bolts go, you'll get 2 per kit. One is longer and smaller in diameter. This 1/2-inch bolt, it's like 6.5 inches long or something like that. This also large bolt, I believe it's a 16 millimeter. This is the one you want. It's gonna go right into those existing threads and right through the hole on the outer door skin. I'm gonna use an impact to run it in just because it's a lot of threads. And also when it hits that outer door skin, it might be a little too tight to turn by hand. Yeah, I'm getting there now. Yeah, it's doable, but I'm gonna run it in with the impact anyway. And we're gonna run it in all the way until it stops. Tighten it down good and snug. Then we'll go to the other side and make sure that the Razor Pack is lined up and we can slide it right on that stud. So if it isn't lined up perfectly, if it's not close enough just to push it into place, you may have to loosen it up, loosen up the whole Razor Pack, raise it up and slide it over so that it is. In our case, we landed pretty much on the money. So before we put it on, we're gonna put a backing nut on this. This basically just ties the whole thing together as an assembly and gives a solid stop. It'll make more sense in a minute. This also sets the depth of the bottom mount. We'll be able to adjust this in a minute. Okay, so just pop this on until it stops against the nut. And then when we do the final reassembly with the plastic back on here, we'll be able to tell how deep this nut needs to be set. But basically, it's about 3/8 of an inch or so that the plastic needs to stick out from the body. So I'm gonna adjust this nut in and push this up against it until we get that desired spacing. At that point, we'll be able to put the final nut on, and that will really sandwich that plate on the stud and make it really secure. So that's as far as we need to go on this one. That'll give us a template to mark and drill the hole on this side. We include this backing plate. This is basically just a glorified washer. It's gonna be centered right in this rectangular recess here. This notch is where the bolt is gonna go through. So we're gonna also use it as a template. So we're gonna center it here, and these holes that we provide are for you to run a self-tapping screw in. All they really do is help you hold it in place. I'm gonna mark my hole before I put them in. So I'm gonna mark the hole here, and then we'll drill straight through all the way to the other side and use this long 1/2-inch bolt. Mark the hole, and I'm gonna use several different drill bit sizes, but ultimately we want to end up with a 1/2-inch hole, but I do think it's better to step up, so I'm going to start small and drill up to a 1/2 inch. For the outer layer, to drill this same hole, we're on a really curved surface, so it's going to be tricky. So this is more of an eyeball thing, but I think it's best to come straight in with a marker and make sure you feel like your pin is straight left to right and also level vertically. So I'm going to go straight in and mark a hole. If you look around here, you can see on a really curved surface. So we're actually gonna drill our pilot hole at a bit of an angle so the drill bit doesn't walk. Before we proceed any further, we're gonna sight through the hole in the razor pack, through the pilot hole, and make sure that we're in line with the hole on the inside of the van. And then we'll do the same thing from the inside looking out before we enlarge this hole any. Okay, we're gonna step up and drill up to our 1/2 inch size. Since we're drilling through on an angled panel, we'll probably have to drill through from this side and from the inside, just to shape the hole the way it needs to be. Do something kind of similar on this side as we did that side, but since we don't have the factory weld nut welded to the body like they did for the magnet, we're going to basically create our stud. So we're going to use the supplied 1/2 inch nuts on the inside. So as we thread this through the hole, we're going to put a nut in between the two panels so that when we tighten it down, we've cinched this inner panel between the bolt and the nut, and that'll give us a really rigid stud. Then that'll be sticking through the front side to attach our panel to, our pack to. Before I assemble this, I'm gonna put this plate back on, and I'm gonna install it with the self-tapping screws. Okay, so for this first layer, it's gonna be the long bolt and a flat washer, and then this nut on the inside. You have to make sure the bolt goes through the outer layer that we drilled as well at this time. So you can see it coming through the outside now. Before we get too far along, we're going to put another 1/2 inch nut, just like we did on the first one, to act as a backing plate. So all that matters is we get it threaded on for now. We don't have to adjust it. To speed this process up, I'm going to use an impact and a backup wrench once it gets tight. But I want to make sure to keep the nuts adjusted towards the bolt as we go. So I'll tighten the bolt a little bit, then I'll bring the nuts in. Okay, I know you can't see as well on this video, but the nut that's just on the other side of this panel is just about snugged up. So now it's time to tighten it the rest of the way down. The nut that's on the back side, we can bring forward until it touches the bottom mount. I'm going to set this mount to the body at about 3/8 of an inch, just like I did on the other side. Next, we're going to add the stabilizer to our inner driver's side stud. So this is just going to use 1/4 inch hardware. It's going to bolt to the door skin of the van, and it's going to go around the stud. So it's going to help prevent a little bit of walk left and right, and also give it some fore and aft stability. So we're going to put it on the stud. And then we're going to also make sure that our mount is on the stud as well. So it popped off the stud throughout the process. So there, I'll put it back on. I'm going to adjust this last nut that we put on so that when it's all pushed together, we've got about that 3/8 gap between the body and the bottom panel. And that'll basically tell you where this needs to be. You really can't put it on the wrong spot. Temporarily, I'm going to run a couple self-tappers in here just to hold it in place. And then we'll replace those with 1/4 inch bolts. If you didn't want to put all 4 in, you probably don't have to. It does give you a pilot hole to drill the 1/4 inch hole, but that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to take these out one at a time and replace them with bolts. I'm using a 1/4 inch drill bit because we're going to use 1/4 inch bolts. When I get to the other side to put the nuts on, it's going to be a really tight area and hard to see on video, so I'm just going to do my best to explain it. So one at a time, I'll take these out, and I'll drill my 1/4 inch hole, and then I'm going to put in the bolt, and then I'm going to go to the inside, which is kind of hard to reach, especially if you have the passenger van with the speaker in the back door. Actually, these aren't too bad. You might even be able to see it. So we're going to do flat washer, then lock washer, then the nut. Okay, that's one, and we'll repeat 3 more times. Last step on the stabilizer bracket is to tighten the 4 bolts down. They're 1/4 bolts, so it's a 5/32 hex key and a 7/16 backup wrench. that has our lower mounting hardware ready to be finished. Everything's tightened down. We've got the backing nuts set right where we want them to set the correct depth in and out, that 3/8 of an inch roughly here. So all that's left to do now is take it off and put on the clear vinyl protecting film and the lower plastics. So before I take this off, I'm gonna get a measurement on where the center of those are so I know where to put the vinyl. So I'm gonna measure from the center of the door, or from this edge where the two doors meet. The center of this one is at 3.5. The center of this one is 27.25. So that's where I'm gonna put my two pieces of vinyl. And I'll note that they need to come down about 4.5 inches. All right, we'll pop it off the bottom and lift it off the top. I'm gonna open it up so the door hits its stopping point. This plate, you won't need to drill this side, but we will need to drill a hole for this stud. So we're gonna measure, just hook on the top, come down 2 3/4, make a mark. From the side, it's gonna be 2 5/8. This only needs to be about a 1/2 inch hole, but just in case it's not perfectly accurate, or if yours is a little bit different, I'm gonna use about a 1 inch hole saw. We're covering it up with a big 3-inch wide plate, so it doesn't matter too much that our hole is gonna be a little oversized. It's gonna make it easier to install this way. Oh yeah. So this nut is what we're gonna push into, so it doesn't need anything else. This one is snug up against this backing plate. So now all we have to do is snap this on, and then we'll go to the top end. Time to put the vinyl on. I made tiny little marks at that 3.5 and 27.25 that I measured earlier. And I'm just gonna let this piece overlap over the top about 1 inch or so, right over that edge, and smooth it from the top down so I don't get any bubbles. If you do get a few, don't sweat it. This whole thing is concealed by the mount. All right, the vinyl is on. Now we're gonna hang this on there for the final time. And this time it's gonna be really important that it gets seated all the way down, because there's not a lot of clearance between the top of the door and the body of the van. So just make sure before you shut your door all the way that this is all the way down on the edge of the door. All right. Now I'm gonna put the last washer, lock washer and nut. Last thing we're gonna do is really make sure these are tightened down. I like to make them really tight. You shouldn't really need the backup wrench on the inside, just keep an eye on it, make sure it's not turning. Since we sandwiched all those nuts against, or the nut against the bolt, it shouldn't need anything else, but just keep an eye on it. Ready for accessories. Okay, the last thing to do on the driver's side is reassemble this plastic inside panel if you have it. If you do have it, which most vans don't, most of these are getting installed on cargo vans or custom camper vans. Our plate here covered up one of the mounting holes for this, so it's this bottom one. I've taken it out, and maybe you broke one when you removed it, which was the case on this, so I'm gonna reuse this one up here. Make sure all these are right where they belong, and snap it back together the way it came out. There's 3 little screws that we took out, and the cup caps. Let's move on to the passenger side. Luckily, the driver's side is much more difficult just due to the shape of the door, so this one will seem much easier. So we're going to take this same 16mm bolt and run it into the same set of factory threads where the magnet was. We're going to go ahead and hang the mount, or the Razor Pack assembly, on the door now before we drill any holes over here. I think I noted when we were assembling this on the ground that you might have to loosen it once you hang it, and that actually happened here just now. So what happened was I had all this very square, and I hung it on top, and it didn't line up on the bottom. So I went and just barely loosened all 8 bolts so that this could shift like this, left to right. Because I have the top pretty much where I want it. So having these loose allowed me to put this where it needs to be at the bottom, slide it over that stud. Now I'll tighten these down again where they are. I'll actually go ahead and do that now. But We didn't have to on the left side, we needed to on the right. Maybe I didn't get it as square as I thought on the ground, who knows, but just be prepared. It takes a few seconds, might be necessary. Next, we're gonna drill the holes for this inner rail. First, let me back up and say, I slid this outer side over the stud so it can't move. It's right where it needs to be. I tightened back my bolts so that this width is set where it has to be. So now I know that this bottom left mount is right where it needs to be. So I'm gonna mark through the hole. And then on the inside, we're gonna drill in this panel, this last flat spot, level with this round hole right here, parallel with it, and roughly centered in this panel. So I'll drill this hole from this side and the matching hole from the outside in. I'm going to take it off so I can drill the hole in the outer panel, and while it's off, I'm going to put the vinyl on. So take your measurements and do that while it's off. All right, just like last time, we're gonna put this through the hole, and on the inside, we're gonna run this nut, and this nut's gonna set just in this little square-sided recess. Okay, so now if you can envision it, we've pinched this inner layer. I've got the nut really tied up against this piece here. And then we're going to connect the outer layer by running the second nut all the way out until it's in contact with the outer skin. And then we'll pinch that from the outside with this nut. So when we tighten this all down, we will have tied the inner skin and outer door skin together with this bolt, almost acting like a piece of all thread. So the last thing we do before we put the rack on, we'll put the one last nut that's going to be a backer for the rack to sit against. So now that I've got this all hand tight, I'm going to tighten it down. I'm going to start with this nut that's just right inside here and tighten it up against the bolt. Then I'm going to go and push the second nut as far forward against the back side of this skin as I can. Then I'll tighten down this one against it. All right, we got these tightened down. This stud is very solid now. Before we hang the pack on, I'm going to put that back there. Put this one back behind, and we're going to drill this hole. This one for ours ended up being about 2 3/4 from the center edge and 2 7/8 down. I'm pretty confident in that number, so I'm just going to drill it out at a 1/2 inch. Test it real quick. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to hang the rack, set these to the right depth. Then I'll slip the plastic in and we'll put the last of the hardware in. All right, so I've got this set back on. I'm gonna push it up till it hits the nut. Check my depth. I need to bring it out just a little bit. That looks about right. Okay, so I'm gonna pop this off. We're gonna reinstall the plastic, and don't forget the license plate lights. Lock washer, nut. Same over here. Flat washer, lock washer, and nut. Okay, we're just going to reassemble the inside now. You can kind of see a sticky, dirty line where this stuff used to be. It'll help you line it up and put it back where it belongs. That's got it wrapped up. Check out the other VanUp videos for information on the tire carrier, toolbox, and bike rack arm mounting. This has been an installation of the VanUp Razor Pack for 2015 to current Ford Transit high roof. Thanks for watching.